Because it is precisely in pain that the key to transformation is hidden. And that is what we will discover in the next part, how suffering, far from being an enemy, can become the gateway to your true strength. Let's dive deeper, and this time, without fear. You learned to hate pain. Since you were little, you were taught that suffering is a sign of weakness, that crying is a waste of time, that feeling too much makes you vulnerable, and so you began to run, to avoid, to deny. But the more you flee from suffering, the more it chases you. And the worst part, it changes form. It disguises itself as anxiety, anger, apathy, boredom, self-destructive impulses that you don't even understand where they come from. Ignored pain does not disappear. It just digs tunnels inside you until one day, without warning, everything collapses. Jung saw suffering in a completely different way. He believed that pain was the messenger of the soul, the alarm of the unconscious, the language that the self, what you are in your entirety, uses to get your attention. He said, "Depression is like a lady in black. If she appears, don't push her away. Invite her to sit down, offer her a coffee, and listen to what she has to say." But you don't listen. You silence yourself, distract yourself, keep yourself busy, numb yourself. You do everything to avoid looking at what really matters. What is this pain trying to show you? The truth is that suffering only hurts so much because you are still at war with yourself. There is still a part of you wanting to grow and another part wanting to keep everything as it is. There is something inside you that cries out for transformation, but your ego, accustomed to control, tries to suffocate that call. And it is in this friction that pain is born. Because change hurts, growth hurts. Letting go of old beliefs, cutting toxic ties, allowing what no longer serves you to die. All of this is a mourning, an internal process of death and rebirth. But it is precisely in this space of ruin that something new can be born. Because when everything in you is deconstructed, when certainties crumble, when pain lays bare your vulnerability, you can finally see who you really are without the layers of protection, without the performance, without the mask. And at that exact point, suffering becomes sacred. Because it brings you to your knees before the only thing that can set you free, yourself. Jung knew this. He understood that suffering is not a failure of the system. It is part of the process. Pain is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of the journey towards individuation. The problem is that most people give up before crossing that dark valley. They flee, they distract themselves, they return to the surface. But not you. If you have made it this far, it is because you are ready to cross. And in the next part, we will understand how this crossing process happens, how the path of individuation, no matter how lonely and brutal it may seem, is what finally sets you free. Let's continue. It's getting deeper now. Few people have the courage to begin the journey of individuation, and even fewer have the courage to complete it. Because this path does not promise comfort, does not offer guarantees, does not protect your ego, it destroys it. Jung referred to individuation as a process of becoming who you are. But this means, above all, unlearning what you think you are. And that hurts more than any external rejection, because you start to realize that much of what defined you until now was an illusion. You are not your achievements. You are not your traumas. You are not the image you constructed to be loved, respected, or admired. All of this was what you created to survive. But surviving is not living, and individuation is life's call beyond survival. It is when the unconscious begins to push everything that has been repressed, hidden, and distorted to the surface. Individuation requires the dissolution of the persona, Jung wrote, for it is merely a mask of collective convenience. In other words, you will need to tear off your own skin to discover what lies beneath. It is in this process that you begin to become untouchable. Not because nothing affects you anymore, but because you have already gone through the fire. You have faced your monsters. You have looked into the eyes of your shame, your neediness, your anger, and said, "I see you, and you no longer control me." It is this internal clarity, this lucidity in the face of your own darkness, that gives you a strength that does not depend on approval, recognition, or control. You no longer need to be loved by everyone. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer need to appear strong, because you know who you are, and no one can take that away from you. True emotional armor is not a shell, it is a core. It is the integration of all your parts into a center of consciousness that remains unshaken in the face of storms. You may feel pain, but it does not break you. You may be hurt, but you do not lose yourself, because you have stopped being reactive and have become whole. You have stopped living on the surface and have begun to inhabit the depths. However, this depth comes at a price: loneliness. Not because you will be alone, but because few people can accompany you on this journey. Most are still trapped on the surface, in masks, in the fear of feeling. And when you begin to free yourself, you inevitably distance yourself. But this distancing is not rejection, it is maturation. You do not distance yourself out of pride. You distance yourself because you no longer fit where you once hid. And this brings us to the final point of this journey: consciousness as a shield. Because it is not strength that protects you, it is clarity. This is what we will discuss in the last part. Consciousness as the only state in which nothing, absolutely nothing, has more power over you. Let's finish this crossing together. We are almost there. Now that you've made it this far, there is something that needs to be said very clearly. Nothing, absolutely nothing, will shield you from external suffering if you remain unconscious of what happens within you. The words will continue to hurt, the rejections will continue to sting, the losses will keep bringing you down, until you awaken. And awakening is not a magical event. It is a daily choice. It is looking within, even when it hurts. It is taking responsibility for everything you feel, without blaming others, the past, or fate anymore. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." You have spent your whole life resisting. The fear of not being enough, the emptiness of rejection, the pain of loneliness, the anguish of not feeling seen. But what did you do with that? You hid. You silenced yourself. You tried to control everything. You tried to be perfect. You tried to be strong. And all of this has brought you here, exhausted, tired of fighting against the world and against yourself. But now you know. True emotional immunity is not hardness. It is clarity. It is not about creating armor. It is about expanding your awareness. Because when you understand your triggers, your patterns, your wounds, the actions of others lose the power to destroy you. You still feel, but you don't drown. You still suffer, but you don't lose yourself. And that changes everything. What shields you is not protecting yourself from life. It is diving into it deeply. Those who live on the surface get hurt by any wave. Those who dive know that there is silence, stability, and power down below. And that is where you're headed. And when you start to live from that place of integration, presence, acceptance, the world may try to knock you down, but it no longer finds where to hit you. If this video touched you in some way, if something within you has awakened, write here in the comments, "I choose awareness." Let's start a movement of people who no longer want to survive by pretending to be strong, but to live with truth. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. It's important. You need to keep going. Real transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. See you there.